Hello everyone, welcome back to another Dark Tower video. If you're a repeat viewer, this will be the last video in my Dark Tower series, at least in my videos covering the books. I might throw out a video there eviscerating the film one of these days, or spend some time talking about my fan casting, because of course, who doesn't do that these days? But this will be my last video dedicated to exploring the Dark Tower series through writing, and focusing on a trait from each novel that I think exemplifies what makes it work. So in this video, because I'm covering the finale of the series, I will of course be focusing on what makes the Dark Tower VII an almost perfect conclusion. So the first thing I really want to cover is setting or establishing or raising stakes. I talked about this in my second video covering the drawing of the three, and that a sequel should raise stakes, but a finale should also really clearly establish what the stakes are if the characters fail. And a great way of doing that and conveying to the audience how dangerous things currently are is by killing off a beloved or powerful character like almost immediately. The Dark Tower VII, the Dark Tower, does that expertly when it kills off the character of Father Callahan. I think Callahan dies within the first 15 or 20 pages of this novel, and that's a great way of telling the audience and the reader that we are in the endgame now. This is something that a lot of really great and effective finales do, because it just conveys how hopeless things are going to be for the majority of the conclusion. For example, Mad-Eye Moody is one of the strongest wizards and characters in the Order of the Phoenix and in the Harry Potter series and whatever. And in the Deathly Hallows, he's killed in the opening few pages. What this does is tell us that the villains are more powerful than they ever have been before, and now the heroes are weaker than they've ever been before. This is why it is important to understand why certain things only work in a finale and can't be done earlier in the series. Because stakes should constantly be getting raised, but at a certain point, stakes can't go any higher without getting ridiculous. Otherwise, you end up with something like the Fast and Furious franchise. Stakes need to have a very clear ceiling to the reader, and the finale should hit them and go no further. This novel does that perfectly by killing off Father Callahan almost immediately. Next up, this is obvious, but a good finale should tie up loose ends. And I don't just mean like plot loose ends, that's important, but also it should conclude character arcs. A lot of times these are going to be character arcs concluded through death, which is perfectly okay. But they also might be character arcs concluded through like going into exile or getting a happy ending or whatever. And I think that this novel, The Dark Tower, ties up both its plot questions and its character questions pretty expertly. When looking at this novel from a plot perspective, pretty much everything is accomplished about halfway through the book. The big things that Roland and his buddies have to complete is freeing the Breakers, and saving Stephen King, and protecting the Rose through the Tech Corporation. And I think all three of those things are accomplished by like page 500 or 600 or so. And the rest of the book is just dedicated pretty much to character work and Roland being sad, which personally, I love an introspective finale, one that puts its characters and heroes through literally every possible obstacle, and this novel does that, both like in terms of plot and also in terms of character. Other extraneous fat that wasn't really central to the series is trimmed pretty early in this book. Mia is like consumed by Mordred pretty much immediately. She's gone, and Flagg is also killed by Mordred fairly early, so we don't have to worry about that guy anymore, but I'll come to that later. The only thing that this book really leaves until the end is the Crimson King, which again I'll cover later. And the introduction to Patrick Danville is like in the last quarter of the book, but he is pretty well established and foreshadowed throughout the beginning, so I still think it works and isn't really that egregious of a writing technique. Continuing from that, a good finale should also, of course, have impactful deaths. These should be deaths that feel like they have weight and meaning and purpose. If you're a longtime viewer, you might have watched my video, Every Character Deserves a Funeral. And if you are not a longtime viewer and a new-time viewer, I recommend checking it out, sort of. Because I like the content in it, the quality of the video itself is not the best, but basically in that video I explained that if a character dies, there should be a specific purpose or reason to it. It should either be the end of their arc, or it should be important for somebody else's story. And I think that all the deaths in this novel work very, very well. I think it was pretty clear from the beginning that all the characters have to die, and the way they're slowly shed off one at a time from Roland, I think is very tragic and sad, and works very, very well, because you can almost measure the pace of the novel by how many characters there are left to kill off, and that's just I think, exactly what a finale should be doing, because this finale manages to do it in a way that doesn't feel gimmicky or like it's done for shock value. It feels like it's done for a specific purpose. In finales that do not work, such as, say, Season 8 of Game of Thrones, characters are killed off just because there's nothing else to do with them. And I know it's a common technique or reason that writers kill off characters, and I don't think you have to kill a character just because there's nothing else for them to do. They could, like, leave the series or get a happy ending or something, but the deaths in this series, and in this novel specifically, definitely feel like they have to happen and are there for a reason. All of the sacrifices and deaths here feel very earned and like they tie off a character's end very neatly. For instance, Jake's death is, it's heartbreaking, but it works perfectly because he's killed getting struck by a car, similar to how he initially died and got sent to Midworld in the first place. And it also connects well to Jake's second death, his death in Midworld, when Roland chose to let him go and let him die on his quest for the tower. In this case, we see how far Roland has grown as a character from the beginning, because he's forced to watch Jake die while being unable to save him. This is the complete opposite of him choosing to let Jake die in the first novel, and it works great. Same goes for Callahan. Callahan dies facing off the vampires, strong in his Catholic faith and his belief in himself, which is a huge contrast from his ending in Salem's Lot when he is cast out by Barlow and, like, struck by lightning trying to get into the church. It's a great ending for Callahan and shows how far he has grown as a character. Eddie's death is also great. He dies surrounded by his friends and his family and with a purpose, whereas he spent his entire life with no purpose and with no real friends or family. So his death in the sacrifice of something greater and in the purpose of something good is a perfect ending for him. Not to mention that the death of Eddie about halfway through the book signals pretty much like the death largely of the plot and of the happiness in the series, because Eddie is the laughing man. He's the comic relief because he adds so much life and levity to the series, and to have him go really, I think, sends an important signal to Roland, the characters, and the reader that things are not going to have a happy ending. Next up, of course, we have Oi's death, which I don't even want to talk about because it's so upsetting, but obviously, like, a character like Oi, you have to kill, just like you have to kill Hedwig. It's the whole, like, Little Rock, Big Rock thing. It just makes the story feel more impactful, and that's all I want to say about it, because... Now, conversely, Susannah not being killed off is, I think, a perfect ending for her, because for Susannah, it was never a struggle between life and death. It was a struggle with herself. And her being able to return to New York is very beautiful and a wonderful use of the multiverse aspect of this story. The fact that she gets to end up with Jake and with Eddie and a dog version of Oi is very, 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 very sweet, and also is important when considering the overall thematic end to Roland's story. And I will be covering that in great detail in about 2 more sections, 2 more parts, 2 more chapters, 2 more... It's very important for a finale to connect to previous entries, obviously, and build upon them in a satisfying way. In my multiverse video, I talked about how relying on nostalgia is lazy writing, but how something like, again, The Deathly Hallows uses nostalgia well to show how far we have come from the beginning. This novel, again, does that really, really well through examples like Jake's death and contrasting Roland's reaction the first time to how he reacts this time. This novel allows us to see some classic fan-favorite characters again, like Shimi, and it is nice to get characters back for finale to again remind us of who we've gone on this journey with in the first place, and also to keep promises, such as Roland laying Aunt Talitha's cross at the foot of the tower. This was kind of like a minor point promised in the 3rd book, and I love that it comes back all this time and all these years later, because it just shows that at his core, Roland is a nice guy and he wants to keep his promises, and it also shows that he has reached what he is trying to reach, which is a restoration of happiness and peace and contentment for all of the people in Midworld, such as Aunt Talitha and the other people in River's Crossing. And this is really what finales should be doing. If they have some sort of like positive ending, or even if they have a negative ending, they should be restoring a type of balance to the series and answering questions and paying things off that have been set up from the beginning. Weak finales generally don't answer past questions or generally don't address character arcs or things that are made to seem significant earlier in the series. This is the classic Chekhov's gun rule. If there's a gun in the mantle in Act 1, it should go off by Act 3. You should not introduce things that are never going to be paid off or answered in a satisfying manner. And finally, I'm a huge sucker for stories ending pretty much exactly where they began, and so Roland ending his quest as he began it alone is perfect. And the series ending with the same line that it began with is also, I think, perfect. Which brings me now, of course, to... I'll just get one thing out of the way right off the bat and say that I love the ending. I think it's perfect. I understand why people would be unsatisfied by it, why they would want more, but I think it works perfectly. And here's why. I've mentioned in other videos, and many other people mentioned elsewhere, that this is ultimately a story about addiction. And I think that the ending of the series really proves that. Roland has been obsessed with this tower since day one. All he wants to do is reach that tower. Yes, he has noble reasons for doing so, but really, him reaching the tower and seeing what's at the top is not noble. Him reaching the tower itself is not actually what saves the day. What saves the day is protecting the beams and defeating the breakers, which they do halfway through the novel. And yet Roland continues on that quest to reach his tower, honestly, just for the hell of it, because he's always wanted to. He wants to know the answers. And this is like an ultimate question of literature and fantasy, is like how much knowledge is too much. Roland essentially wants to look in the face of his creator and ask what his purpose is. His creator being the tower. He wants to get to the top of it. I bring this up because Roland has the opportunity not to do this. Susannah starts getting this feeling that she shouldn't reach the tower, that Roland has to reach it alone. And as a result of this, she asks Patrick to draw her a portal back to New York, or some version of New York. Roland could go with her at this point. Roland could choose to be with Eddie and be with Jake, or maybe go back in time to be with his friends or whatever, and instead he continues on by himself to the tower. Why? Because he's addicted. The whole moral of this story, specifically through Eddie, is that you overcome addiction through your connection to other people, that you can find your purpose and happiness through family, and find yourself through family by shedding extraneous things you don't need and by shedding addiction. Roland understands that and just chooses not to acknowledge it. As a result of this, and as a result of choosing not to return to Susannah, Roland is choosing addiction, and the story punishes him for it. And I think what's very interesting is to ask what really sets Roland apart from the Crimson King. The Crimson King is insane. He's a madman who kills everyone around him and does things just to do them. The Crimson King has unlimited power. He can do whatever he wants. He can make the world an infinitely better or worse place. And at the end of the day, what he decides to do after all of his goals are completed is to reach the Dark Tower. Why? Simply because he can. And yet the Dark Tower locks him out. I think this makes Roland and the Crimson King an interesting set of foils. Especially interesting considering the Crimson King only shows up in one scene in the entire series, and it is this scene at the end of the tower. If the tower is drawing both of these figures, what really sets them apart? Now, Roland is able to defeat the Crimson King, of course, because his pursuit of the tower was initially noble in purpose, and I love that the Crimson King is just reduced to a floating pair of eyeballs on a balcony. I think that is just an amazing image. But at the end of the day, Stephen King makes it out perhaps even worse than the Crimson King. They are both doomed to a cycle of repetition and nothingness because of their longing for the tower. The Crimson King reaches the tower, yes, but now he can't do anything with it. All he can do is sit there and float with his eyeballs. Roland reaches the tower, yes, but what does he get in return? The opportunity to seek it out again, and again, and again. This also fits perfectly with the wider narrative of the series. They talk constantly about Ka being a wheel, and wheels, of course, come back to where they began. With that in mind, I think it makes perfect sense that this story ends exactly where it began. Additionally, reading this series for a second time, knowing how it ends, I definitely see ways that this is set up. For instance, in the Drawing of the Three, there's a point when Roland reflects on how things would go in a certain situation if he had the opportunity to live through them again, or he has this kind of feeling of deja vu and of living through things again, because he's been on this journey before. Of course, it's different at the end of this book, because now Roland has the horn, and I think the questions that raises are interesting, but I'm not going to get into them here. So with all that said, why do I say this is an almost perfect conclusion? Well, because I think this book really suffers from the previous two. I don't think that Wolves of La Cala and Song of Susannah are terrible, but as I mentioned in my previous video, I think the pacing is thrown off, and I think it's clear in those books, and somewhat in this book, there are things that Stephen King just didn't quite know what to do with. For instance, one of my favorite characters both in this series and in Stephen King lore in general, probably my favorite Stephen King character actually ever, is Randall Flagg, and yet I'm bothered by Flagg's presence in these novels because he adds nothing to the story. If you completely removed him from the plot, essentially nothing would change. He's important in The Gunslinger, obviously, but from that point on, he doesn't really create any meaningful conflict or raise any interesting questions or interact with the characters in an interesting way. He's always just sort of there, doing things and contributing to discord, but he never really interacts with or has a personal relationship with any of the characters of the heroes other than Roland in the first novel, and so he just takes up page space when he doesn't really need to. And that's pretty obvious when Mordred kills him early on. I think that scene exists just to show how powerful Mordred is, because as mentioned, like, if you kill an important character at the beginning of your finale, you are raising the stakes. And so if you have one of the most powerful villains, Flagg, killed by a new villain, Mordred, you are raising Mordred up to a very great height of power, and Mordred should be a pretty bad dude and wreak a lot of havoc if he has the ability to take out a character like Flagg, who is supposed to be important. And yet, Mordred does nothing in this book except for shit his pants and kill Oy. And don't get me wrong, killing Oy is a pretty big deal, but I'm not going to pretend that it is quest-ending important. He stalks the heroes the entire time and is pretty easily dispatched once he actually shows up. And this is especially frustrating considering that the entire 6th novel is dedicated to the birthing of Mordred and the prophecy surrounding him and whatever. Yet he doesn't even come close to killing Roland, and he doesn't even really throw off the hero's plans at all. In fact, he does them a favor by killing Randall Flagg. I think partly this comes down to Stephen King really wrapping a 7-8 novel series around like 4 or 5 key characters. You can't really spread out the character deaths or action because there aren't that many characters to kill or deal with, and he doesn't really bring in new characters. Father Callahan is really the only character who shows up and then sticks around for multiple books. Otherwise, like, none of the other characters from the Kala stick around. Jake and Eddie and Susannah are new characters in the 2nd book who stick around, obviously, but that's pretty much it. They don't meet anyone else on their quest who returns other than Shimi. Brodigan and Dinky are introduced in this book and leave the story in this book, and so the narrative is really confined to the characters it's able to explore and play around with, and it ends up kind of spreading itself thin at times, if that makes sense. However, the biggest issue in this book is Stephen King's writing. His storytelling is on point. I read the last 450 pages of this book all in one day. It's very readable, it's exciting, but his actual writing, like his sentences and the things he chooses to include, are really kind of fumbled at points in the final 3 novels in this series. Specifically, I think in the coda of this novel is Stephen King really just losing it. And I'm going to read you a passage that illustrates that. Essentially, this is right before Roland reaches the top of the tower, and Stephen King takes a moment to look directly into the camera and talk to the audience. So, in the middle of immediately following a very tender and sweet ending to beloved characters, and immediately before this extremely serious and introspective finale to his best work, Stephen King decides to write this. I can close my eyes to Midworld and all that lies beyond Midworld. Yet some of you who have provided the ears without which no tale can survive a single day are likely not so willing. You are the grim, goal-oriented ones who will not believe the joys in the journey, rather than the destination, no matter how many times it has been proven to you. You are the unfortunate ones who still get the lovemaking confused with the paltry squirt that comes to the end of the lovemaking. The orgasm is, after all, God's way of telling us we've finished, at least for the time being, and should go to sleep. You are the cruel ones who deny the Grey Havens, where tired characters go to rest. You say you want to know how it all comes out. You say you want to follow Roland in the tower. You say that it is what you paid your money for, the show you came to see. I hope most of you know better, want better. I hope you came to hear the tale and not just munch your way through the pages to the ending. This bothers me for a number of reasons, not only because of Stephen King preemptively calling out his audience who he thinks is not going to like his ending, but also just the bizarre tonal shift to talking about, as he calls it, lovemaking. I think just sucked me out of the story. And it's just another example of Stephen King being gross and weird when he doesn't need to be. His books are messy when they're not good, and they lack any sort of grace or elegance, and it especially stands out when his writing does have grace and elegance, and he just ruins it by, again, being vulgar and strange for no reason. I think the worst example of this is, of course, that famous scene in the sewers in it. And for as often as he thanks his editors, especially Chuck Verrill, I've got to wonder, especially in his later years, like what exactly his editors are doing. Alright, so that brings us now to the song segment of this video, and I'm going to go over some songs that I think connect well to this novel and the series as a whole. So, first up is Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. I think this one fits for obvious reasons. The atmosphere, the genre fits well, but also the idea of climbing up to something or having expectations, and the idea of there being two paths you can take, and taking the wrong one is something that applies perfectly to the end of this novel as Roland chooses the wrong path. This song also details kind of like a search for knowledge and understanding, but an ultimate failure to gain that knowledge or understanding because we make poor choices instead, which again is Roland's journey because he chooses addiction. So very good. Okay, another one is a song by Matt Mason called Dancing After Death that I think applies very well to Eddie and Susannah, but it also applies to Roland and Susan. You can look at it a couple different ways. It's because Susannah and Eddie are able to be reunited in kind of afterlife or different version of reality. All of Eddie's story is dedicated to being a better man and growing from his addiction, specifically through Susannah, so I think it fits beautifully. Alright, this one is The View Between Villages by Noah Kahn. Sorry to all the indie girl fans out there if I'm saying his name wrong. But I love this song, and I think it fits perfectly well in Roland and his quest, and I could already see it like in the TikTok edits and the YouTube fan tributes. Once the series is made, I can see the song being used. It's a great song about being stuck between two places and reflecting on the journey that you've gone on, and here are some lyrics that I think really represent the story well. Fits perfectly for Roland at the end, especially if you think about his journey in Wizard and Glass, but also his journey in this novel. The death of my dog, obviously, Oi. The things that I lost here, the people I knew, his various quartets, and kind of that feeling almost of peace at the end, but of course we know it gets ripped from him, and I just think it ties great to the liminal space of the tower. The folky atmosphere is perfect, and yeah, I love this song, and I think it's perfect for the ending of the series. One other song that I think is fun is Don't Talk to Strangers by Dio. I think the fantasy hard rock blending is great in that song, and that's something that was obviously a huge inspiration to Stephen King in his writing of the series. And I think that it covers pretty much all the important elements, like the magic of starlight and like these secret hexes that are like hidden in strangers and women, and the idea of like going on a quest is great. All of Dio's Holy Diver is just awesome. Fits great with this series. And I know that Stephen King is a big 80s rock fan and listened to it a lot when he would write. And I would not be surprised if Holy Diver was an inspiration for these books. So yeah, Don't Talk to Strangers by Dio. Check it out. I think that fits the series as a whole. Lastly, I want to focus on a quote that I really like and that I think is one of Stephen King's best quotes, and it's the best quote from this book. And no, it is not the man in black fled across the desert. It is instead the line which kind of wraps up the Susannah in New York epilogue section. And it is one that I love because it represents not just the series well, but life and storytelling well. And I think it's a quote that I'm actually going to print out and hang up in my classroom this year. And will I tell you that they lived happily ever after? I will not, for no one ever does. But there was happiness, and they did live. That's all. That's enough.